This is the Scott Mighty Boy, a 200-pound London pattern anvil. Most of us, when we think about anvils, we see a London pattern in our head. It's a classic shape for an anvil because it is so darn useful and so practical without any of the frills, bells, and whistles you might find on some other anvils. Some of those extra features can be awfully nice, but they may not be something you really need on an anvil to get good work out of it. This is a made in the US anvil, weighs 200 pounds, 29 inches long from the tail to the tip of the horn, and 4 3/4 wide across the face. It has a 1-inch hardy hole. Like a 1-inch hardy hole, it's way easier to make tools for it. And if you're buying hardy tools, either new or used, 1-inch ones will be a lot easier for you to track down than 3/4 or 1.25 inches, any of the other sizes you find hardy holes in. So that's a nice size for a hardy hole. And it has a 5/8 Pritchell hole. But like any new anvil, the edges are a little crisper than you probably want for forging. It would be easier to introduce cold shuts and stress risers in your work that will eventually lead to failure. Plus, it's a lot easier to chip the edges of an anvil if you leave them fairly square. Now, this isn't sharp enough to cut yourself. This is better than some of the anvils out there, but it still needs to be dressed. So the first thing I'm going to do is dress this anvil and dress the edges of the hardy hole so it's a little safer and more friendly to work on. I started this with a 60 grit flap disc, finished with a 120 grit flap disc. Probably didn't take 10 minutes to do the whole thing. Remember, you can always come back and do more later, but you can't put it back on very easily. So don't get too carried away unless you really know what you want. I marked the anvil off into some zones for different radiuses because you don't always want the same thing. Up near the step in the horn, I have a fairly aggressive radius just in a short area. Then I've got a big area right over the waist of the anvil where most of the forging will happen that is nicely radius but not overly aggressive. A little bit less radius towards the tail, and then right on the tail it's almost left perfectly square, just enough to knock the sharp edges off. Now, as far as anvil height goes, the common recommendation is about knuckle height when standing next to the anvil. This one's about 1 inch higher than that. I like that better. It suits the way I work. Depending on what you're doing, how large of a hammer you're swinging, how big a material you're working, you may want your anvil higher or lower than that. If you're working with a striker, you may want it lower. It's an argument for having more than one anvil in your shop to have some higher, some lower, but in general, about knuckle height. And be willing to adapt a little bit. If you make it a little bit low, it's pretty easy to block it up and add something to raise it up without having to build a whole new stand. Now, as far as horn direction goes, you got a decision to make whether you like it under your hammer hand or whether you like it closer to your tong hand. A lot of people prefer the horn by their offhand or their tong hand. Personally, I want my hardy hole to be by my tong hand, so there's little or no risk of accidentally hitting a tool that is in the hardy hole while I'm forging. If this tool is over here, there's a real chance I could accidentally hit that, so you have to make sure you take that out all the time if it's next to your hammer hand. Some anvils, the hardy hole is up next to the horn, so it's not an issue. But for London pattern anvils, you got to make a decision on which one of those things is the way you want to set your anvil. Of course, if you leave room, you can work all the way around your anvil, and there's plenty of times that comes in handy. An anvil is much more useful if it has a cutoff hardy to go with it. So the first thing I'm going to do with this anvil is make a cutoff hardy. I'm going to make it out of 1045. This is a simple steel. It's going to be easier to forge. It water hardens, so you don't need a bucket of oil or anything like that. Nothing very fancy about this. It's just going to be a simple cutoff tool. So I'm going to work in the gas forge. I'm going to get this piece of steel hot, and I'm going to start by upsetting this where I want the shoulder to go. This is where the hardy sits on the anvil, and then the shank goes down into the anvil. Now I've been at this for probably about 2 hours, midday in the July heat. It's sort of a miserable process, but it can be done. Part of the problem is that the gas forge heats way more material than where you want the upset. This would be ideal done with a torch or the induction forge. Those tools aren't available over here, so I'm doing it with the gas forge, and you have to just keep upsetting, thinning out the ends where you don't want it upset, upsetting it some more, going back and forth. Eventually you can get there. What would be easier? Start with a piece of 1.25" square bar. This would have well been worth ordering something online and waiting a couple of days for it to show up. I'd have the tool done by now if I'd done that. 1045 like this is, or 4140, aren't all that expensive to buy a foot of 1.25" square bar, and you'd get at least 3 tools out of it. Defining where this shoulder is a great use for this more radical rounding that I did closer to the horn of the anvil. Well, I'm going to let that cool down with the forge. I'm probably going to leave it overnight, come back up here tomorrow morning. And that way it'll be softer, easier to grind, file, whatever it is you need to do with it. I'll plan to do this with an angle grinder instead of the big belt grinder, just so it remains more obtainable if you have a smaller shop. So for me, I'm going to call it a day. For you, we'll be back in just a second. I'll let the cutoff hardy cool overnight. This should be plenty soft enough to file by hand if necessary. I'm going to go ahead and use an angle grinder on it. Now this thing is not perfectly straight. It's a little bit wonky. That comes from trying to upset a round bar into a bigger square bar. It's a lot of work doing that. I think I mentioned earlier, starting with a piece of 1¼ inch square bar to create the 1-inch hardy shank, and leaving a shoulder at that point probably would have been easier than trying to upset that round bar. But the round bar is what I had, and we succeeded. This is going to be a functional tool. Just going to take a little bit more work grinding to make it pretty. Of course, if it ends up a little funky in the long run, you use this tool till your skills and your tooling improve, till you have that perfect piece of material to make a good hardy out of, and then you make another one. Well, that's a nice basic cutoff hardy that fits the Scott Mighty Boy anvil and makes the anvil so much more useful. Taking the time to make the tools that make your life easier pays off in the long run. And after forge, hammer, anvil, a cutoff hardy may be one of your more useful tools. Now, there's certainly an argument for not hardening and tempering a tool like this. It's going to take a lot of heat and use. It's going to draw that temper way back. But my philosophy is the only way you get this back to dead soft is to heat it back up to critical temperature and let it cool slowly. So as long as that edge isn't getting an incandescent glow to it up in the cherry red range or something like that, it's still going to be a little bit harder than if we had just left it normalized or annealed. It's kind of a judgment call. A lot of people will make tools like this out of good steel, not bother to harden it and temper them, just because they are going to get hot. You just have to accept that you're going to spend a little bit more time dressing the tool, keeping it sharp, that kind of thing. Of course, if you don't let it get too hot in the first place, you won't have such big problems. And you can make tools like this out of more heat-resistant steel, but it'll cost more and it'll be a lot more work. I want to thank Wellshod, the makers of Scott anvils, for sending this anvil out for us to look at. This is an outstanding anvil. It's the biggest anvil we've looked at in our series of anvils, and a 200-pound anvil is a lifetime anvil. Very few people will ever need an anvil bigger than 200 pounds. So this would be a great anvil. It's reasonably priced and pretty easy to find. The Scott anvils are available from a variety of blacksmithing suppliers, farrier suppliers around the country. So you should be able to find one of these. And of course, you can always go directly to Welshod and order from them. But they do have a network of dealers, and that might be a good way to find one a little bit closer, maybe save a little on shipping if you can go pick it up yourself. As far as the stand on this anvil goes, I was actually quite impressed. It's a lighter weight stand. It's not as heavy as some, but it stayed put very nicely. And on the dirt floor, it kind of seeks its own stability. It will compact the dirt a little here and there in the high spots, and it became very stable. I didn't have any trouble with this stand moving around or dancing too much. So it was a really good setup, really nice anvil. I'm going to keep it over here in the small shop. We still have the old anvil. We'll use it some. We'll use this one some. But like all of the anvils in this series of anvil reviews, we're going to see it more in future videos. I'd also like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to watch these videos, with a special shout out to my channel members and my Patreon patrons. Channel members generally receive early access to the videos, while Patreon patrons at a certain level not only receive early access, they receive the videos ad-free and occasionally some exclusive behind-the-scenes content, all available over on Patreon. So if you're interested in any of that, be sure and check out Patreon. If you're interested in the build for the anvil stand, I'll link to that video right down here. In the meantime, I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, stay safe, have fun, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.